Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, just to get an update from Mr. Garba Shehu, who is the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity about the President in Russia. He joins us via Skype this morning. Good morning and thank you for joining us today. So, at the moment, has the President, I assure you, must have settled in properly. So what do we expect? What's the activity for this morning in Russia concerning this meeting?
The president just drove out of the hotel on his way to the conference center. The proper Africa-Russia Economic Summit will open this morning. And after that, the president is going to have an important meeting with President Putin later in the afternoon. And of course, there are also events slated for the evening. This is for today. Tomorrow, there will be the plenary of the Russia-Africa Summit. And Africa leaders would get 4 minutes of time to speak. President Buhari will be delivering an address. And thereafter, he has about 5 or 6 other bilateral meetings, including a meeting with the Nigerian professionals in Sochi, Russia. Before the events of the night, a banquet dinner and a cultural entertainment for the visiting heads of state and government.
But Mr. Shehu, you know, on a lighter note, in all the years I've known you, I've never seen you in this because I always asking my directors, wait a minute, do we have the right man here? But
well, sometimes. Sometimes also you also catch the cultural fever abroad, so you shed off the babariga and appear like they do. But I assure you that back in Nigeria, I will resort to my kaftan and a big gown.
Okay, but I know that it's Russia-Africa Summit, but do we as a country have a specific plan of what we intend to get from this meeting?
Oh, obviously, yes. This is why this meeting with the President Putin is important for President Muhammadu Buhari. There are about 50 African heads of state and prime ministers who are already here. But of all of this, only 5 have one-on-one meetings with President Putin, and President Buhari is one of the 5. It is hoped that at that meeting, President Buhari will go with a basket of demands. And top of which, of course, is the issue of Ajaokuta. Look, Ajaokuta has failed to work since the Russians walk away. And the thinking in our delegation is that they should be persuaded to come and complete it and put it to use. We have enormous gas resources. You know, Russia has made the most success of their gas resources in the world. We want to do we want to learn from them, enter into partnerships, do gas pipelines, and also market our own gas abroad. There are issues of science and technology, power, nuclear energy, and military armaments, education, culture, and investment and trade. So really, there are many issues we have. And the president is really ready to go and make those demands.
So Africa appears to be the new bride in the world. I mean, there's the China-Africa Summit, the Japan-Africa Summit, and some others. And beyond that, there's always this question of what kind of deal Africa, in fact, specifically Nigeria, always gets out of this sort of, summits and agreements. So what are we doing to ensure, and there's no pun intended here, but what are we doing to ensure we are putting our best foot forward in this summit?
Well, international relations for all countries is governed by self-interest, national interest of nations. The Nigerian delegation led by President Muhammadu Buhari is here to do no other thing than to promote the best interests of Nigeria. Africa appears to be on the front and the dialogue of everyone because, these countries are seeing the enormous opportunities that lie ahead of Africa. Much of it remains unexploited. The discussion taking place here And elsewhere, as you have mentioned, is on the basis of a win-win for them and for ourselves. We have about 200 Nigerian participants who have come to be part of the Russia-Africa business discussion. These are businessmen who are looking to what they can make or what they can get out of Russia. And the Russian businessmen are also going to be there exploring what it is there for them, for Nigeria as Africa leading economy and the rest of the continent. So everyone is a winner, hopefully so.
Well, one of the things that a number of people will also be wondering is, okay, so we've had the US Africa, we've had the UK Africa, and a number of other, countries of the world that are trying to partner with Africa. The question a number of people are asking is, isn't this some sort of economic colonization? And how are we protecting ourselves, especially in the light of the AfTA deal that Africa has signed among themselves?
Well, here is what we are looking at. We are not saying that relationships we have had with Europe and all of those partners over the years have not been useful. They have had their gains, they still do. But if you have an offer for the kind of things that are happening, say, between Nigeria and China, huge investments in railway, in roads, in power. I mean, we have waited for too long to get these things done. And this country cannot achieve national development without infrastructure such as the ones we're dealing with. And the difference, it's a global competition, and let's enjoy it. Look, the Chinese would give you project, will give you loan. Europeans would give you a project, and they will show you the door to a bank and say, well, there is a bank, go and get money. You know that? So therefore, I mean, these things are being easier done through some of these relationships than most people think.
One more thing, Mr. Shehu. Can we get a little more specifics about Ajaokuta? So what are we asking for? Is it that it depends on what we eventually agree, but one thing is to ask, are we going to request of them to come back in? Because I think at that time, Ajaokuta was about 98% done, if I remember properly. But are we asking them to come back in, take over, get it operational, and then with a view to getting the private sector also to be in the front lines or side by side? What kind of request is that going to be?
Okay, we have the Minister of Mines and Steel on the delegation. He's going to sit down with his counterparts to discuss these things. And so I'm not reporting to you any final deals in this regard. But the sense we have is that we had been careless with Ajaokuta, and we need to go back to it because Nigeria has invested so much money into it. A lot of Nigerians, thousands of them, have been trained to participate. Nigeria is importing even bullets that our policemen and the military fire. These are things that can be manufactured from Ajaokuta. So in the past, the Russians had said they wanted business people to come in front and take over. What President Buhari is offering is a government-to-government, the deal. That brings with it credibility and reliability. Of course, don't forget that at some point, a government in Nigeria had given this thing at a giveaway, if you like, to some Indian businessmen. These businessmen are in court as we speak. They probably would resort to arbitration and all of that. But I think that if the Nigerian government is able to establish fraud and impropriety, as we are doing with the P and ID, we probably would walk them out of Ajaokuta and have government-to-government relationship to revive and to achieve its full realization.
Okay, could you speak to this? Because there are those who think that in the president's trips and journeys for this kind of business, economic summit meetings, they should have a lot more of private sector individuals in that delegation rather than more of maybe governments government agents, I say, well, what's your thinking concerning that? Or what is the thinking of the presidency
No,
regarding that?
I think people who say this don't appreciate this. In all of the president's delegation, I can tell you, probably 24, less than 30, including the ministers and the governors who are here, security, protocol, and media. But I've told you that I am aware that the Russian embassy in Abuja had given 250 visas to people, private people who are coming. So it's their own show, really, more of business than government.
So, Shehu, we know it's a busy schedule, and we certainly do look forward to a fruitful conversation and agreement, particularly as you've highlighted with that of Ajaokuta. And thank you for talking to us this morning.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
All right, Garba Shehu, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity. And speaking about the economy and business, we've got Mr. Segun Ajayi here with us. He's the Director General of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Good morning, and thank you for coming on today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, we heard from him there, so let's get your impression quickly about that. If, first of all, getting to Russia and requesting Ajaokuta is on the front line, that sounds good, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, because the steel sector should be the backbone of any nation that is industrializing, because you require it for, several things, your machines and so on and so forth. But I think it is critical and important that in this new approach to reviving Ajaokuta, we need to be very strategic and to be mindful of innovations, technological advancement that has taken place since we last left the scene. So I hope and I believe that we have people that will handle that in Russia. They should be mindful of it. I was a little bit worried when I had government to government. I don't mean to downplay the importance of government to government relationship, but I think it's important that we also have the private sector actively engaged in the process to revive it so that it can be sustainable. I do not think that government is a good businessman.
This is why I asked him, and he said that the Russian embassy had given about 250 visas to those who will also be coming on this team. So is that in any way going to...
That is a relief for me. I mean, when you initially asked, I was anxiously waiting to get the response. And I think it's a relief. But I do hope that there's a synergy between those who are going on their own and the government delegation, such that the government delegation is seen right behind the private sector people that will be engaging. It is always important it's a relief for every businessman to assume that the government of that country is way solidly behind any business deals they'll be making.
You know, earlier on you talked about technology, and I mean the Ajaokuta in the late 90s is should not be the same Ajaokuta we'll get in 2019. And that brings us to talk about the fourth industrial revolution and what manufacturers in Nigeria are doing, how we're keen into that, such that we're as competitive as we should be with other countries that are actually latching on to this. So let's bring it back home. How are you bringing in disruptive technology and what have you into manufacturing in the country?
Well, as an association, we are always mindful of the environment. I mean, which is what dictates what you do at your industry level. We have 10 sectors and 76 subsectors in MAN, and each sector will respond to the latest developments in that field so that you are able to match, essentially, goods that come from other climes in terms of technology, in terms of packaging, in terms of speed to market, and so on and so forth. So technology is one aspect of it. And what we do is we deliberately seek synergy with those who could upscale the capacities that we have. The fourth industrial revolution is here, but you do know that essentially and behind every success you can achieve should be R&D. It should also be infrastructure that supports your capacity to be able to latch onto it. The private sector person can only invest in an environment that is conducive. And no matter how advanced you are, you will still have to be limited by your environment.
So beg your pardon, just wanted to quickly butt in there. So how conducive is the environment now?
Well, there are so many challenges in this environment. And I think that as man, we have taken a decision very strategic to work with government through all of this. The Nigerian economy remains largely not too supportive, I must say, of the manufacturing sector, in the sense that, and these are historical issues. It's not necessarily what's happening now. We are still challenged in the environment we operate, especially, if I could refer to the manufacturer CEO's confidence index that we conduct every quarter. The indication we have is that they are expressing less confidence in the environment because of the challenges that have continued to play out. The issue of infrastructure, is debilitating. And I think it's continued to rank in all the 4 quarters that we have had. It continued to rank the highest. It is followed by, I think, multiplicity of taxes and levies. Immediately you put up your signboard that you are manufacturing, you become a host to numerous government people, local government, state government, and federal government. Then you also have the cost of even complying with the regulatory issues. Regulation is not about revenue generation. And I think this has to be made very clear. Even the Nigeria Customs Service, I think the impression is given that they are revenue generating agents. I think they should be trade facilitators.
Because people address, you hear many times, even National Assembly, several people, they always refer to, you have customs, you have immigration, you have, so many of government agencies, they keep referring to them as revenue generating agencies.
They even get targets.
Yeah.
And that puts a lot of pressure on those agencies to deliver on revenue. And we are at the receiving end. So I think the conversation should be that we are all agents, actors in the economic development of Nigeria. So there has to be a realization, a reorientation of all those agencies to support trade, because you mentioned that we are entering into African Continental Free Trade Area. Mm-hmm. This is bringing competition nearer home. And you have to look at your capacity to be able to play. Ordinarily, everybody will expect that Nigeria will be fantastic in delivering, have beneficial engagement. But when you go granular, when you drill down, you will realize that your competitiveness is low.
Well, you mentioned something the other time about, the governments, from the questions we also asked, governments, agencies, becoming, also making money, generating revenue. In that light, does it seem like government and private sector are in business competing with each other?
Well, that's a funny competition, but I think it's true, because we are in business to make money, and they appear to be in business to make money. Government needs revenue, but a smart approach would be that you incentivize people to bake a bigger cake, and then you can have a share. If you do not allow manufacturers, our operations in the first half of this year was 54% of our installed capacity, down from 61% in the last quarter of last year. You are going to collect less revenue no matter what you do. So it is smarter, it is better for you to support manufacturing. It is better for you, for instance, to allow your raw materials, those that are not locally available, the machines to retool and the spares and so on, to come into the country at a rate that will promote production. And then you have many more people seeing the successes recorded to invest and to expand and to employ more people and so on and so forth.
Let me assume that you are having conversations with the relevant agencies in order to facilitate easier means of doing business in Nigeria. What kind of conversations are you having, and how fruitful is it?
No, we'll be having very useful conversations with government. Like I told you, these problems are historical, and you need to be able to work with government. However, you realize that there is no qualification to being in government, and you have transition from time to time. So you have to leave room for, you have to recognize that there's a limitation in that respect. I think it will be good for the country to get to a level that no matter what happens, there are some thresholds you don't go below. And you must be able to transit effectively, even if there's a change in government, whether it's different political party. We must settle on certain things that we don't longer have any conversation about. But I think now we keep on having this conversation. With this administration, we have several platforms that we engage government, and we are working with them to resolve the issues. But you know, time is of essence. And the future, some people say in the future you did it. The future is here. Yeah. And competition is going. Other nations are incentivizing the manufacturing sector. And we have 200 million people, 60% young population, more than 36% of those not actively engaged.
When you mentioned, the multiplicity of taxes, I'm just curious, let's be practical a bit. What do you think will work for a manufacturer, for example, that is just coming into business? What kind of tax holiday or what kind of tax incentives do you think they should get?
Frankly, there are several in the books. You have pioneer status, you can get tax holidays, you have infrastructure, tax breaks, and so on and so forth. But what you see is implementation. It is extremely difficult. And the ones that we really complain about are the ones that are not planned. If at the beginning of the year I know I'm going to pay X tax, I can do my calculations very well, it's spaced out and so on. But those ones that you do not expect, most times, you spend more money on those than the ones that are statutory or that you expect. Eventually become statutory because somebody is wearing some uniform or has a letter of authority to collect those taxes or levies or fees. Sometimes they don't even differentiate between the three, as if they just mean bring money. And essentially for a manufacturer who has a lot to contend with, it is good that we get this organized. And there has been several regulations that have streamlined the taxes and levies to be collected. We had a decree, it was amended, we went to government. We worked through with government to agree on those taxes and levies. But it is just on the shelf.
When you spoke about the sector operating below the capacity it did previously, what was the reason and how should we address that?
Well, I think certainly also we had an election year, and the ministers resumed only recently. When such a transition happens, the manufacturer is always circumspect in terms of its planning and projection. So you want to be careful and so on and so forth. So we are expecting that in the second half of this year, we'll witness more activity, and especially focusing on 2020, because that is really the time that we are going to see what the second coming of this present administration is. We look forward with enthusiasm. Incidentally, in the confidence index of our CEOs, they are very optimistic that the future is going to be bright because we are not resting on our oars. We are establishing synergy with our counterparts in and out of country. We are anxiously waiting for the action committee on AFCFTA so that we can better address the supply side constraints that should limit our competitiveness. We want to see how we ride on the agreement to be able to boost our reach to the 1.2 billion market that is in Africa. But I must say this, we must be very careful, extremely careful. Otherwise, we'll be creating a market of 1.2 billion for Europeans, Asians, and Americans to come and explore. We must deliberately have an agenda that produces what will be sold in that big market.
I think maybe moving forward, subsequently, we should have an extensive, expansive conversation about, this after how the kind of role that the private sector should and can play. Government, they have their negotiators as well. How do they interface with here? What kind of protectionist policies should government or will the manufacturing sector or OPS, organized private sector, require of government moving forward? But I think that will be something that we can do moving forward. But we need to appreciate you and thank you for coming on this morning. We've been speaking with Mr. Segun Ajayi-Kadare, who is the Director General of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.